Those on. There we go. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the December 11th, 2023 meeting of the Riverfront Advisory Committee. Start with public forum. Don't see any members of the public, so we'll close public forum. Acceptance of minutes from last month's meeting.
I just have
November
a
13th.
couple of comments. Even though I was not at the November meeting, I did watch it on demand. And one thing I'd like to have everyone recognize is that I could not hear anybody but Sam on the recording because the microphones are too far away. I think there was some people, someone from downstairs came up to adjust the microphone for Lindsay and for Bart, but it was very hard. So let's all be cognizant of that. The other thing I just want to get on clarification is the spelling of Rivermoor is actually Rivermoor,
Okay.
and it's Rivermoor Landing. And for clarification, there's a spot in here that says that there's some maintenance. There was discussion about the Riverwalk North in front of Rivermoor Landing. Maintenance is needed. I think the maintenance, or at least my understanding, is that the area that needs maintenance is the Riverwalk that is in front of Lang's Wharf condominiums, and not Rivermoor. Is that correct?
Yeah, that brick walkway.
Yeah, so that's Lang's Wharf condominiums, not Rivermoor condominiums.
Just as a question though, are you correcting, or do you do both correct? Are you trying to capture in the minutes what was said or what was actually, because you weren't here,
Right, but I did watch it. And so I guess what I'm looking at is just, I got the impression, the little bit that I could hear, that it's actually the area in front of Lang's Wharf condominiums. So it's if you guys want to clarify it, I think that's necessary.
Yeah, I think the main thrust of it, as I remember it, was though that basically that Lindsay was going to look into understanding what was actually what was actually documented, what was
the easements and such.
Easements and stuff, understanding who had what and who had responsibility for what.
Okay.
So what Joe's just trying to capture is the general area of
Yeah.
Who's responsible for what?
I understand that, but
I think my recollection was, I had in my mind that brick walkway in front of.
right, where bricks have come up and trees have come down, and I think it's Lang's Wharf condominiums, LANG''S. I think that's what it's called, Lang's Wharf. So that includes the building that was Joyce's Kitchen, and then the 4 condominiums that stand on that same property.
So if I say there was discussion about the Riverwalk North in front of Lang's Wharf and Upper River.
Well, I think you talked about expanding the Riverwalk North in front of Rivermoor Landing, maintenance needed in front of Lang's Wharf. And again, just put that in for clarification.
Okay, so maintenance is needed in front of Lang's.
Wharf condominiums.
I do have one proposed edit as well too. Second paragraph up from the bottom. The whole concept of trying to get the information on Chicks Weir. It's collected for the committee. I'd propose to strike committee and write Conservation Commission in 2020. I think it's just a little bit more pointed that it wasn't information collected and delivered to this committee. It was for a different purpose.
So
3.5 years ago.
Let's get background information that was previously collected for the Conservation Committee?
Yeah, for the Conservation Commission in 2020. I think that just provides more context of when it was delivered and where.
In 2020?
Yep.
Okay, so, what I added was, there was discussion about the Riverwalk North in front of Rivermore Landing. Maintenance is needed in front of Lang's Wharf condominiums, so I added that, Lang's Wharf condominiums. And, the second paragraph, Joe asked if we could add a future agenda item, January, February timeframe to discuss Chicks Weir. Sam stated he will try to get background information that was previously collected, and I added for the Conservation Commission in 2020. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Okay. Any other comments, edits, proposals?
So to accept the minutes?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from 11/13/2023 as amended.
Second?
Yeah.
Excellent. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, awesome. Right into it. New business. So we do have a guest tonight, Aiden Berry from DES. Aiden was part of the Great Bay Living Shoreline project that some of us assisted with. Some of you are kind of coming in after that had wrapped, but basically the town had an opportunity to get some professional help from, that sounds silly, but get professional help from some folks to work on looking at Shanda Park, and came up with some of those initial concept designs that we passed around a little bit amongst ourselves as to some park improvements, general park improvements, as well as the initial baseline of the living shoreline down at Shanda Park. So it's been 18 months since that ended. It's been a while. So I think it's just a conversation of, I think things have adapted, you know, major changes, just so you're aware kind of on our end is, you know, really since that project wrapped and now the town has a new, you know, town planner, community development person who's not able to be here tonight, as well as a new town engineer, Lindsay Butler, who's sitting behind you. But there's great new kind of dedicated like town staff that are engaged with this now. The committee's been around throughout this process and is kind of continuing to try to stay engaged. But I think it's been a lot of groundwork, but we've been doing a lot to try to make this concept a reality and build communal support for something like this. So I think really the invite tonight was kind of twofold, you know, make you and DES aware of the changes on our end, you know, that there's more people involved now and that this is working to try to make that groundswell of support for it, but also just kind of check in and see like what else has changed. You know, it's been a while. What's changed on your side? You know, are there things we can be doing? Is it the same general people involved? Just a quick chat. I don't want to keep you all that long, but I think it was just show you that, you know, I think we're serious and there seems to be a lot of support in town to make something of that project long term. So I would invite you to go up to the mic because I don't think anyone hears it on the TV unless you're sitting in front of it.
Is it on?
That's a great question.
There's a light on. Or no, is it for recording purposes?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, we'll technically televised. Can try one of these too.
So when I put it on, the light turned off.
Just in case.
Sure. Need me to introduce myself formally, or
If you
no? All right.
we
so
try to not be that formal.
Okay. Never know, but just, you know, just in case, I'm Aiden Berry. I'm the Coastal Resilience and Habitat Specialist with New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Coastal Program. So as Sam kind of mentioned, this project wrapped up, well over a year ago now. Can kind of dive into, or just give a quick summary of that project if that's helpful. And really the kind of handoff point of that was developing conceptual designs for Shanda Park. There are also several other properties throughout Great Bay that were kind of brought to a similar point of a conceptual design, the plans themselves, a narrative, a materials list. Say that project is funded through NIFWIF, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. It was really to expand this idea of living shorelines into New Hampshire. They're more well established, I'd say, in the Mid-Atlantic, and it's a little bit more delayed up here in the Northeast, primarily because we have different conditions. We have higher tidal ranges. It's colder. We have to deal with ice, which is something, in Maryland and Chesapeake they don't have to think about. So it is a practice that's been around for a while. However, there's several nuances to kind of get them going. So the purpose of this project was to kind of bring folks from DES, local towns, as well as, local stakeholders, just residents, but also the regulators from DES, as well as it invited folks that are in kind of the consultant side of things, so doing the actual engineering, landscape architects, to kind of all come together to work on this practice and develop some examples throughout Great Bay, including Shanda Park. And that was a process that took a sort of number of years, depending on how far back you go in terms of site selections, working with Newmarket to kind of get that situated. But that was about, I don't know, I guess it ended up in like May of 21 or 22. I can't keep my numbers.
Sounds right. I think it was
Yeah.
May of 22.
Yep, and
Maybe.
on those fronts there was Forsyth, Shanda Park, Spur Road in Dover, Moody Point also in Newmarket, and then Chapman's Landing. In terms of how those have moved along, it's been pretty slow going. Spur Road has done some minor kind of updates. They haven't really followed through with the plans quite at this point. We're finding that living shorelines, I mean, it wasn't really a surprise. We had to get federal funds to kind of make this project happen, is that these projects are expensive, complicated to follow through with them. You need a lot of funds or a lot of buy-in. Being in this intersection of both uplands and waterways, they're pretty complex in terms of designs. We want to make sure we're doing it right. So those are kind of moving along. Living shorelines in general in New Hampshire, we have several in Portsmouth. We actually just got funding, I think, last week to extend the Wagon Hill living shoreline. And that, the phase 1 was installed in 2019, and now it's 2023 that we're getting to phase 2, and, that had, I don't know, almost a decade's worth of talks, if not longer, to really get that through. So they are, take a while to follow through. But happy Sam invited me, as well as a person who couldn't make it today, but she's working closely on the Coastal Resilience Grant Newmarket has with Bart. So she's a little bit more in the loop than I am necessarily, but happy to just kind of hear what updates you have. If there are any specific questions, can try to address them. If not, I know plenty of folks at Coastal Program or the Wetlands Bureau if you have questions focused permitting. I know, Sam, you emailed a couple questions, but I don't know if there's an agenda you had or what you're kind of thinking for this conversation.
I think it's a little bit more, and what, Lindsay, not to put you on the spot like I tend to always do, but I think it's also just if there's anything you want versus like the lens of us trying to remember stuff from a while ago too. If there's anything you wanted to ask direct throughout this conversation, by all means, speak up as well. But I think it was more just that. I mean, I am glad, I guess personally, to hear of how long the Wagon Hill discussion was, because I feel like we're on a similar trajectory.
Yep.
But in relation to the conversations we're having and engage people, there's also the town's ongoing effort to, update the master plan. That's kind of ongoing right now, as well as potentially next year. I think we're holding a Plan New Hampshire charrette to kind of specifically discuss the Riverfront area. So I think some of that guidance is we've wanted maybe less for the master plan than the charrette, but I think one thing we've talked a lot at this committee level about is just having these ideas be a little bit more, I guess, concrete or fleshed out, so that when we present them to the public, they kind of have a better vision on what it is. So, not that it's, do our work for us, but is there any like tips or thoughts or what has maybe worked in the past for
Right.
building support for these? Because I think it's just when we ask people what they think about it, or is this an idea that they support, I think we just want to have something tangible behind that request and not just like a sentence with no basis. I think that's what we're kind of working on right now.
I would say foremost just kind of reviewing all the work, and all of you are aware of just like how important Shanda Park is, but how small it is. So it's a really tough spot in that point of if you're going to be doing work there, it's probably going to be some closures. So it's really important to have some of that buy-in throughout. I think what's been really helpful for Town of Durham, especially with Wagon Hill, is, as these develop, is having those examples, such as Wagon Hill, that's helped them kind of proceed with other kind of restoration projects in the town. So not to say like go to Durham, check out their Wagon Hill, but having those examples, I can also share. I think it's on the Living Shoreline website, but some of the like kind of state of the practice, if folks are interested in reading more about, how this works, why it would be that type of design. But without getting a little bit too far ahead, but it is something to think about down the line. I know from the reports that we wrote, mentioned there's other work that could be done at the park, specifically Moonlight Brook, but also, thinking about stormwater. There are other things that you could kind of advance ahead of the living shoreline that, folks might see those changes or those advancements, kind of, give them a little bit of incentive and then expand in terms of funds from there.
Yeah, a lot of those kind of discussions, Lindsay's very involved with some of that, and that's moved a little bit, but I think it's been a real, I feel like it was a really good thing that the Living Shoreline project, such as it was to sort of stimulate discussions within the town, happened with it did. It was very helpful to have that expert input at the time, and it's been constantly referred to as we've tried to advance our discussion. So I think it was really helpful, and as Sam said, we added personnel now, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense to do a lot with Shanda Park if it was not understood what was going to happen with the culverts there in Moonlight Brook. You kind of had to do some of the foundational stuff to make sense of that. And the other thing, and I don't know if anybody's mentioned this, but we've had some conversations and did some field work last summer especially. So some conversations have advanced about whether the Living Shoreline project is best confined just to Shanda Park or whether it goes beyond. And I think there's been more conversations around that with Lindsay and involving where the Crate Street pump station is. I think this would make it, a much stronger from that standpoint. Having more positives for it. So I think it's slow going. We certainly know that, but I think it's good to be making, a lot of it is going into making it a better proposal at some point down the road.
Yeah, and that's something could certainly help with. I think Sam brought that up in a previous email of expanding it, and that too, kind of, if say you're going to go for funding from federal, if you can show that it's not only improving, community space, but also, I'm not too familiar with the pump station, but, public infrastructure that supports the community. That's often, some sources of funding are looking specifically at that, public space that also improves infrastructure for the community. So that, from that, it sounds like it's pretty important. I think Kirsten had a question along the lines of, thinking about extending a living shoreline that way. how much thought has gone into that? Is that something that would, be two separate living shorelines, or would it be a continuation and the park would extend into the pump station, or would they remain separate kind of?
I think those are examples of things that need discussion. I mean, the challenge for the living shoreline is that at Shanda Park, if it involved taking away part of the land that is Shanda Park, that was going to be really tough. It's an important park and really, it's not large.
Yeah.
So
It's pretty tight on space to begin with.
Right, so if you can, move some of the, parts where it is a living shoreline and protecting it down there in front of the pump station like you were talking about, you both have an opportunity to use that as an educational aspect. It'd be very visible from there. You can have walks that go along there. You can incorporate that kind of protection, but you don't have to do it at the expense of the park. And I think that's likely to be attractive all the way around, and it's kind of more realistic. And then you can, so I think so it's quite a bit different than it was at the time, but like I've told several people that, because I was around at the time when we first, submitted that request, and one of the first questions we got when we all got together was, well, how much do you want us to consider it? And that might have been the most important question of all, and we had no dialogue about it. So, I think that all of the things that are happening in terms of addressing Wilmette Brook and all of the conversations we're having about what are the most, there's a lot more land that the town has or controls on both banks of the Lamprey in that area than you first realized. Not all of it's suitable for all purposes, but it gives us a lot of options as to say what is the best place to have a living shoreline. Where will it do the most good and also, make the best demonstration and not be too encumbered. So what I don't know quite how you do is go take what was delivered to us at that time, which is one thing that's been very useful, but what the step is to start to involve stakeholders in a broader discussion of what would make the best sense. I don't.
Yeah, I think one way of putting it that I'd be curious if you might be able to tell us how other people have kind of solved this, but it seems, I feel like part of our discussion has always been stuck in a circular reference of when you're trying to present an idea like this, it's, okay, well, where's it going? What does it look like? What does it cost? But you can't really answer that until you kind of provide some capital investment to further flesh out those questions. Right. Have you seen anyone successfully break that cycle? Because I think that's where we always get caught up.
Yeah, I feel like for living shorelines, that initial investment has been showing what is the impairment, what are you actually losing. So again, Wagon Hill, they show that they're losing in some places almost a foot a year in terms of their land. So I think, and plus, being a public area, similar ways that, Shanda Park's a park people go and visit. If they're losing that area, that space, I think that was a big incentive. But, I think we got some of that information from the initial Great Bay Living Shorelines project. They did some water levels. I believe they did some erosion pins to kind of, put some numbers to what is actually being lost, as well as some future conditions, with sea level rise or potential loss of shoreline. And I think that's kind of an area initially. I know, Newmarket just got the Coastal Resilience Grant. I think that's more focused on the master plan. But those are often grants we see for this initial kind of planning stage if there's additional data that needs to be collected. Another thing, Sam, I think you brought up before too, is re-engaging some of the folks that were part of the initial design team.
Yeah.
I believe those contacts, are still available on the website, and you're welcome to communicate with them as much as you want. see, it's up to them if they want to respond and sort of start a discussion. But from like our standpoint, the grant and the fund, you're more than welcome to open up those communications. So just,
Do you need or want to be involved in that, like on a copy, or is DES?
we
kinda
don't,
like
I
we're
don't
out
believe
at
we
this
need
point?
to be
Okay.
involved in it at all. Like, again, if you're just want to get discussions going again with them, they're familiar with the site. But, if you're expanding to pump station, that could be a different design, or, things have changed in the last few years.
Am I hearing you right, that it might be important to try to get some of that, figure out the best ways to document things that, if I'm right, Lindsay, and we were talking about there is some impact to the retention of that, they're being impacted by water and sea level and,
Yeah, I mean,
those, if there's intrusion going on there, it might be important to document that as well if we want to expand in that area, I guess.
Yeah, that's something we often recommend. We have a program where we work with individual landowners who are seeing these kind of impairments, and we often suggest, having monitoring, even now, like photos of flooding or where you see loss. It can just be qualitative photos every few months or after a big storm, just so whenever you hand that off to maybe a consultant to do a design, they have more reference. But also, if you apply for federal grants, showing that evidence, also not only how the site's impaired, but if you have documented data of that over multiple years, that shows that the town's been invested in it for a while. That often makes applications stronger, showing that commitment.
What general like funding pots do you see these projects draw from the most?
So Wagon Hills was from NIFWIF. It was the same as the Great Bay Living Shorelines. It's the NCRF, National Coastal Resilience Fund. I can also follow up with these.
Yeah,
Can
that's
send them in an
easier.
email.
Yeah.
One that could potentially work if you're include the pump station. That's infrastructure. I believe it's through FEMA. It's like the BRIC, and that one's focused specifically on infrastructure. And then there's one other one that's kind of eluding me right now, but say, thinking about town-wide projects having kind of more of this, rather than private landowner but public, there's often more monies available for that than, say, private landowners. That's where we're seeing real difficulties, is private individuals can't afford these and there's no funding available for private landowners.
What did they actually do at Wagon Hill?
Like in terms of their living shoreline design?
Yeah. Have they actually started work, or are they just in the design phase of it?
So in 2019 they installed 300 linear feet of a living shoreline, and that was essentially kind of rock sill around where the marsh was in 1990. That's all receded. And then they put in some sediment, I believe, and put in plants as well as some seeds of a low marsh, core logs. They did 300 feet, but we just got funding for additional 1,800 feet.
So basically, they put in some rocks and silt or sand, whatever, and they actually did some plantings to. That's.
Yes.
And that's what we would do here. I'm not exactly sure when we say living shoreline, what way.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
big difference there, because of it's a different kind of park.
Yeah.
And they fenced off the living shoreline there.
Yes.
They
Well,
really.
ours would be fenced off, so more or less too, right? There may be a walkway by it, but.
Yeah, I think in that way it could be similar. We have issues that came up at the time that we had our living shoreline meetings, because there are some of the areas that should be living shorelines were used for kayak launching, and so that got into whole areas of trying to incorporate changes at the boat landing so they wouldn't launch the kayak through there. But the living shoreline of that Wagon Hill is clearly controlling access, because there's a sensitive plant there.
That's something we found not only at Wagon Hill, but private landowners too. honestly one of the biggest things you can do beyond installing a living shoreline or, some large engineering is limiting the amount of foot traffic and impacts to it. That's primarily why Wagon Hill put up a fence. Was, before that there was dog tracks throughout. People are walking all over it. These plants are, they're resilient when it comes to salt marsh or salt water and flooding, but if people are continually compacting the soils, it really reduces their viability. So there are steps such as, kind of directing traffic away from right on the shoreline. I think that was, one thing with Shanda Park is that there isn't like an official kayak launch. Folks have just kind of made their own, but that could, has its own issues.
Right, and the storage was down there
Yep.
close to that beach area, and then there are lots of problems with waterfowl that are continually in there to eating the plants, and there are a lot of things to be thought through, but having different spaces to choose from might lend us with something that's easier to do immediately as a living shoreline, and not try to fit it into such a small place that's heavily trafficked. It's just kind of very different from Wagon Hill in that way. So that's.
I think we sort of have a general consensus, right, at least in my mind, that we're really kind of talking like from the pumping station down, the Moonlight Brook's something's gonna have to be done there. That's probably gonna be a longer term project, but we could do the living shoreline going south, right, easier than Moonlight Brook, I think.
Yeah, well, I know from some of the committee people from UNH, et cetera, they love the idea of a bridge or a big culvert over Moonlight Brook, because they felt like you'd have more living shoreline that would actually go up Moonlight Brook. So there was that as well. So I think.
In my mind, though, it's like, I don't know, there's a lot more hurdles for that, or would be a lot more hurdles for that.
There are.
Then,
Right.
Let's get something done, going south on in front of the pumping station. Sounds like that's an easier road to help out.
Well, I think all of them are going to take, going back to Durham and how long it took. I think there's a fair amount of data because the town's looking for help with grants, so we're going to have to go through a process. And I think what you don't want to do is say, well, let's solve Moonlight Brook first. I'm not.
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't think Moonlight Brook is an easy road
Right.
at this point.
I'm not sure what parts of it are easy, to tell you the truth, though. But I think they're all. It takes a while to do a true living shoreline, but this could be a good idea. It just I'd like to get. I think moving real success might be figuring out ways to build public support about it, which we're doing with the charrette, and get more. Professionals looking at the expanded area. If we want to move it down that way, I think we would have people kind of need to refresh the plans we had from back when we weren't doing that. So,
Let me ask this is amongst us. For the charrette, would it not be better to kind of go in there with a general concept of what we're looking for, as opposed
It
to
would be better.
having it try to,
as opposed to what was it?
as opposed to having a charrette where we ask them, would you like this, would you like that? If we have a more general concept or a design, say, we want to do south from the pumping station down, we want to, this area, we want to do this. Moonlight Brook, at some point in time, we want to do this, but they're probably.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Joe. I think that's what Sam was kind of alluding to before.
Okay, all right.
We
so I'm sure
want
we're
to
on the
give
same
them some
wavelength.
sort of choices, some things where, we spent a lot of time talking about what might be possible. We have to package that in such a way so that you see some of the choices that are kind of have been worked on and might be available, and some of the things that seem less likely. And
Okay, so I say, we do want to have a general concept going in there as opposed to.
yeah.
Okay. Thought you were going in a different direction, so.
So I guess it's mostly just, again, trying to be respectful of your time. It was more just refresh, let you know it's definitely been a topic of discussion. I think I think if there's a parting thought, it's, you know, how can you guys help us from this point, you know, knowing, I forget exactly, Bart said it a million times, when that shred actually is.
September-ish,
Like, yeah,
Fall of
Fall of
2025,
this year.
24.
yeah, so like 9 months from now, we'll have a charrette where we'll try to pitch this as an idea to get the public to actually give us some feedback of do they share our opinions or not. I think if there's a last thing to ask you today, it's, you know, how can DES maybe help us, and how can we maybe help you stay involved? And yeah, and who?
Yeah, I mean, definitely Kirsten and I.
Okay.
And Kirsten's involved with the master plan work, so she's been more in the loop. Happy to give out my email, but, you know, having these updates, and we're happy to help, like, if, as you're approaching that deadline, if you want more input from DES, we're happy to look at it, just kind of give us a little bit of time to review it. So those are the 2 contacts right now.
Okay.
But if, you know, you get to the point of actual designs and, you know, want to bring in wetlands and regulators, we have other folks. But for kind of discussions at this community level and then living shorelines, it would be Kirsten and I. And, you know, like coming to these meetings, if that's helpful, or if emails, you know, back and forth of updates. I mean, it's great to hear that, you know, you're trying to move forward with this. One thing I do want to kind of go back on with the idea of Moonlight Brook, I remember that being a big discussion for this group, as well as, you know, most folks involved with the Great Bay Living Shorelines. So I, you know, might have some additional feedback to share with you after this meeting. But just in terms of projects that involve water, hydrology, everything's connected. Especially Moonlight Brook, that is bringing water and sediment downstream to where this living shoreline could potentially be. And I just remember that being some takeaways that folks had was, you know, there are some definite work you could do in terms of protecting the shoreline, making sure it's stable. But, you know, if you're going to invest, you know, Wagon Hill was multi-million for that living shoreline. If you're going to do that, make sure that the surrounding impairments, such as Moonlight Brook, could be taken care of. But again, I can sort of follow up in more detail about that.
Yeah, and that, I think again, a major change since then is we actually have a town engineer who's very good at that stuff. So I think the town is all over Moonlight Brook as a whole. I think it's kind of left our immediate discussions, or at least taken a little bit of a step back, and town staff are a little more involved with it right now.
Okay.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah.
it's more at technical stages now, and we're not the technical people, so that's moved on. But I feel like, you know, it's solutions are going to be found. They need to be, and I think will be very important once the solutions are understood. That'll be very important to the design of whatever is going to happen to Shanda Park and living shorelines in the area. So that's why it's kind of got to be further design work has to be done in parallel. But it's a good thing that you're not trying to do the final design before you have a much better idea of what the solutions are at Moonlight Brook.
Yeah, I guess one other thing too with the products that were given to Newmarket from the Great Bay Living Shoreline project, you're welcome to share that with you know, the folks that were involved in the design team, but also if there's other consultants too. There's no real like main ownership on that. It's Newmarket owns those.
Excellent.
So.
Okay. I'm all set. Does anyone have any other questions, burning needs for today?
No, that was helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
Yeah, and you know, moving forward, happy to answer any emails, or if you have more of these and want to, you know, sit down and walk through plans or specific ideas, happy to help however we can.
Perfect. No, I really appreciate you coming today.
Yeah.
I think it was more just, it's been a while. We're still here. You're still here.
Yeah.
We still want
Still
to do
kicking.
something. So
Nice.
yeah, no, much appreciated. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. So moving on to Creighton Street Pump Station, site visit. Lindsay and I had an opportunity to meet with Sean Gregg down there, last week? No. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. And just kind of take a look at some of what's going on down there, kind of have some initial, back and forth about potential items with that. So, I don't know, Lindsay, do you want to give a little bit more of an update? Just kind of veering into some discussions versus what might have happened since then, or how much the town wants to talk about any element at this time.
Sure.
Yeah, as vague as that can be.
Yeah. Do you mean like brief summary of generally what we talked about when we were looking at the shoreline there?
I guess that.
And
you
this living shoreline piece of it, or going further than that?
know, as much as we want to talk about.
Okay.
All the way, I wanna know what you.
All the- Well, so we met with Sean to talk about the actual shoreline frontage, what the town owns, what is private property, and access through the disconnect between Shanda Park and the Creighton Street Pump Station and the treatment facility beyond. So we, with respect to the living shoreline, Sean was generally in agreement that it does seem like a decent spot, and he would support if the town wants to pursue putting a living shoreline there. The shoreline that is along the pump station is definitely eroding, and it's actually in worse shape than I expected. Having actually gone down to walk along there, there's some little sinkholes, and you can see where some of the large boulders are kind of shifting. So there is erosion there. That was good to hear Aiden say, like developing a baseline and starting to get some documentation of how that's shifting would be very helpful. It has shifted in the short time that I've been around. I just don't have actual measurements to say how much or at what rate it's going.
Is it shifting inland?
Yes, the stones that are there are kind of like starting to slowly go into the river. Some of them are really big and seem pretty stable. Some of the smaller ones are starting to erode and migrate into the river. So there is a need to stabilize. We may need to do some temporary stabilization in the meantime while we look to do a living shoreline. But we know that there's a need to do something to protect that public infrastructure in the near future.
On a very kind of brief tangent, not to get too far off topic, but I was wondering, hearing Sean said that there was an upgrade to that station in like 2000.
Yep.
Between that and like, I don't know if anyone communicates with like the historical society, but I'm wondering if like there aren't photos that were taken at some point that we could put our hands on that might passively document that. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, it has changed quite a bit.
We may also be able to take a look at aerial photography between that 20-year span.
Yeah.
And there could be some noticeable differences. So I can take a look at what's available. and
Yeah, maybe
talk with Sean.
that
I'm sure
angle.
he's got some photos too, but if you have contacts with Historical Society that would have any of that, that'd be helpful too.
Kind of looking around here. I don't, but I'm wondering if anyone else does for any reason. If not, I could.
I mean, I know Mike Provost, but,
Yeah.
I can reach out to them.
Yeah, I mean, anything other than that, just, hey, we're trying to kind of get some baseline record for what, you know, maybe that Shanda and Creighton Street pump station looks like over the years. If there's kind of photographic evidence of it over the last couple of decades that kind of might show those changes.
Yeah, I'll reach out to them.
That would be the baseline.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
So, just knowing that is a potential area that we could pursue putting a living shoreline, and then we kind of just talked about the access, that there's a private property between Shanda Park, the town-owned property, and the Creighton Street pump station. So we may want to start discussions to see if there is potential to get some sort of easement that could provide public access. I did look into some of the deed information. The language is pretty specific to sewer pipe maintenance, infrastructure maintenance, and not so much just public access through there. So we likely would need to pursue getting some formal easement for public access before we decide we're going to go ahead with that. And that also kind of led into the discussion about connecting to the land up around the wastewater treatment facility and public works and the potential trail connection from Shanda Park in that direction along the river. So that, I think it's a little premature to get into too much on that, knowing that we have that private property crossing, and we should start the discussion on whether or not we have a way to bridge that gap, so to speak. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going to.
So are you going to pursue
Yes,
discussions?
yeah, we're gonna start discussions and see
Okay,
if that's an option or if it's not.
okay.
Hopefully it is, and we could work something out, but we'll start the discussion, see where that goes.
So,
And that Sean and I will.
Yeah.
We agreed that together we'll kind of start that.
yeah, will he be asking about what kind of access the public wants down there, or you just talked conceptually about having an extended walk along the shoreline that goes down that way?
Well, I can say we talked about the trail connection will likely not go along the riverfront side of the treatment facility. There is more property and open space on the uphill side, so the trail would likely kind of go up and around and then could come back down between DPW and treatment facility where that Fish and Game property is,
Where the
and
land-
connect to that space.
Yeah.
Why?
Primarily
Kind of
for
envision that maybe
security.
Move the fence, Sean to move the fence in a little bit, closer from the riverside to the pumping station and give you the room that way?
Not specific, well, there's not really space.
Really?
At the pump station, at the Creighton Street pump station, there's very little space between the pump station and the edge of pavement riverbank. So there is no fence there now, and there wouldn't really be any space to build a new
Yeah,
walkway through there. The fence ends right at the river. It doesn't extend along the river, it's just the bank. And the pavement comes right up to the sinkholes in the grass where the riverbank
I had
is.
in my mind that there was a fence between, there's the building, there's a little bit of a walkway, there's a fence, and then there's the river.
Nope.
No?
No fence on that side. So there's not space by the pump station, and then as you get up the hill to the treatment
The other
plant,
side,
there's not really a safe space there, and there wouldn't be enough space to, I mean, I don't think we would have an opportunity to build out into the river to build the bank, but there's already existing space and trail space on the other side. And we could look into shifting that uphill side fence a little closer to some of the tanks and structures, but the fence around the treatment facility is going to need to remain somewhat in place for security purposes.
Okay.
Sounds like progress to me.
Yeah, definitely of interest. I think, yeah, kind of while you're here, you know, I think I'd sort of mentioned at the end of that meeting, and then I think kind of alluded to in the discussion right now, but I think we're kind of at a point where to truly start pitching people an idea, we need to give them something to buy into. I don't think that discussion is answered today, but how can we advance it from this committee? That I think that's a recommendation to the town is, can we allocate some level of fund to have someone assist with renderings or giving people something visual they can look at, you know, to start buying into this idea. And I don't know if that's working up of we need to develop a scope and then say what the amount is, or if it works in reverse of the town says, well, we can find this amount of money here, and then we try to see what we might be able to do for that.
Are you, I'm thinking about what you might be talking about is where Aiden referenced reaching out to some of the people that were part of the design team with the living shoreline.
Yeah.
And get just in a very high-level conceptual way what that might look like if we did shift the living shoreline down towards Creighton Street. It seems like having some amount of design work around what that could look like and having just a rough sketch of it could be really useful when the charrette happens, and that would be a kind of a reasonable thing to do on the design side of things at the same time all the other grant and engineering works are going on. It doesn't seem inappropriate to me for us. Whoever that person is somebody this committee could work with.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Agreed. So I don't know what the thoughts are, if that's something that has to be advised to town council.
Are we talking for a figure? I mean, $10,000 or something like that, or?
This is where my area of expertise stops, because I'm not a landscape architect.
Yeah, I
which
don't
I feel
really.
like they're the ones that
Well,
ask.
If we figured out who from that committee, you know, I'm not sure,
Yeah.
I don't have the contacts, but if we could identify a person, then we might be able to just engage with that person or that company enough to say, here's what we need, what would it cost us to buy enough you know, in other words, ask that person.
It might
some
be
ideas.
whoever made these.
Yeah,
Whoever made these, that's probably it. 'Cause it's probably not terribly far off from this, but just a little bit more detail, a little bit more specific.
Right. And
it's probably a combination of whoever made the figures and whoever did the kind of conceptual feasibility. Because I
Yeah.
think that's the other piece that needs to go into developing some sort of conceptual plan or figure, determining, I mean, we're talking about a different area if you're shifting from the mouth of Moonlight Brook into more open river flow on the Lamprey. And this is also a different environment from Wagon Hill in that that's more of a low velocity salt marsh area and not a river where you tend to see, it's more channelized, you tend to see higher velocities, and some of these plants may or may not be able to withstand that. If we're seeing more erosion and we have issues like the higher velocities, then it may not be a good spot for a living shoreline. But I can't say that definitively. I don't have that expertise. So reaching back out to the folks that did the project initially to get some of that preliminary feedback, viability, feasibility of using that site, and then kind of outlining what some items would need to be evaluated or analyzed to actually go ahead with putting a design there. Then we could get some general figures. I think that'll work with the timeline of having something like that before we go to the charrette. I don't think we'll have it like next week, but
yeah.
we can at least reach out and see if they can help us.
Did Sean have any kind of urgency on rectifying the erosion that's going on in front of can we piggyback on what he's doing and use that as like the big building blocks of starting the living shoreline?
Somewhat. I think we may need to have more of a Band-Aid fix before we have a full design, just for a couple of spots that look like they're a little more at risk. But I know, I mean, there are a lot of things in the works, like moving the septic receiving up to the treatment facility and shifting some of the use around the pump station. And the pump station is going to need some interior upgrades within the next 5 years. That's another thing that Sean mentioned. So there's opportunity to kind of piggyback on some of the work that Sean is doing to dovetail the projects together. But we probably will need to address the shoreline in a more temporary Band-Aid fix way.
That might be more hand in hand with documenting some of the.
It will, yes. It will help with that.
So with the improvements that you anticipate needed internally in the pump station, and the age of the current pump station, do you think that it needs to be moved to another location? Is that even feasible?
I don't have an answer for that.
Okay.
That would be a much bigger
Exactly.
study.
Right,
I did broach that with him one time, asked him, is it becoming obsolete? He said no.
okay, oh, good, oh, good,
It's like a main pumping station for the downtown area.
okay,
Yeah, the downtown area and everything from the other side of the river from
Yeah.
Bay Road,
okay,
that comes across and all of that comes through that pump station. So
okay,
it is a pretty critical piece of
Right.
infrastructure.
right.
I can picture Sean being real enthusiastic to the
I mean, we could just redo like half the collection system.
Yeah,
That's
no
not
big
like a
deal.
Oh,
Yeah, okay. So I think what I can do is kind of hearing from Aiden again too, that we can reach out to those folks. Why don't I reach out to the 2 or 3 like project managers from the Great Bay project and kind of pitch this to them and see if anyone's willing to kind of engage and offer more on that.
Yeah, and please include both Bart and I
Okay.
on that, because I think there may be some overlap with some of the coastal resilience grant funding that we already have,
Okay,
that some of these concepts, and if we have some pretty basic figures that we need to develop, it could kind of work together.
I can definitely do that.
Do you think they might want to come to one of our meetings, you thinking, or?
I don't know. We'll see. I think we'll just kind of pitch it as, we'd like to re-engage you. We're looking at a potential site. I mean, I don't know if Shanda is actually dead and buried. One thing that I think was actually kind of interesting is we spent a lot of time talking about closer to the kayak portion. And I think me too I always discounted the bit right in front of the main wall of Shanda Park, like where you kind of walk up to I don't know the word I'm looking for, but like the fieldstone wall, the overlook by the boat ramp. I always kind of, I think personally, dismiss the area in front of that wall as being a spot. I know they had identified it in this project as a potential location too. But like that day we went there, the tide was really far down. It was probably the furthest down it's been like in years that I've actually been there at that time. And I walked like halfway out into the river, and like there is a lot of space there. And they always said that the curvature of the river isn't in line with Shanda Park. It's way out from there, them being like DES. I think there's a lot more like potential to that than I might have even given it credit for. So like I wouldn't mind kind of re-engaging on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, I didn't see Creighton as necessarily instead of Shanda Park.
Yeah, maybe.
But,
And
widening the design area so that you can accomplish, it might strengthen our grants. It's not, if you went to Wagon Hill, a living shoreline that's a fairly long stretch compared to just the front of Shanda Park.
that is.
So, I think it becomes, you can strengthen the proposal overall. It becomes grander, but it has multiple objectives. It has infrastructure objective, it has public education objectives, and it has beautifying Shanda Park and preserving the little space we have there too. I think it all can fit in, and I don't know the answers at all, but it seems like it's worth considering all of that when we're trying to come up with a next phase proposal or a concept. I guess concept is the word.
Concept, yeah.
Something that people can look at and say, what if we changed it in these ways? What would that look like? And is it feasible? Is it worth putting much resource in, like you say, if it's not a living shoreline, we gotta figure out what it is then. We may still have to do it, but do something, but it wouldn't be a living shoreline. But maybe it is, I think living shorelines are some combination of hardscapes and vegetation. So you've got quite a bit of room in front of both of those. You're not usually really right in there when you're navigating through there. So if you have something that helps slow down the waves, it's still the same concept you're using at Wagon Hill. You're trying to break up the waves, you're trying to do that so that the erosion isn't going up against the shoreline so much. And, you know, if you could find ways to protect enough vegetation to have it stretch out from there, that would be, that'd be nice, you know. And protect our infrastructure too, so.
I apologize, I have
Yeah.
to leave.
Sounds good.
I can finish off watching the video.
Okay. I don't know if we have a ton of time left remaining anyway, so, yeah, I think let's just start with that. So I'll message those people kind of out of the blue with you and Bart on it and just see what engagement we can get.
Yeah.
And what's offered. There was a lot of people involved. I think everyone down to like potentially like independent operators all the way up to like major engineering firms. So I think who actually did certain elements of this,
Yeah.
I think we need to figure that out because that's going to change the answer dramatically.
And UNH, there was quite a bit of UNH involved.
There was a lot of UNH involvement, so I think it's just who did some of this, and can we talk to that person further?
Yeah.
Or persons.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think kind of shifting to the old business part of it, the whole Riverwalk community trail thing. So I had sent you that map, like, again, literally Friday, so I know you haven't done anything with it, but I sent Lindsay a map that I printed out and promptly left on my desk at the office, so I don't have it here. So I think I'm gonna bump this whole thing to maybe like January.
Okay, I have it if you want.
Oh,
I did print it out.
all
if
right,
you
someone
want.
does their job, good. So, yeah,
Not so fast.
I had sketched this out.
Do you want to pass it around, or?
I know what it looks like, maybe, yeah, just to have someone take a peek, so that it knows what we're talking about. But this is something I had kind of sketched out like last month before the Concom meeting, when I kind of brought it up to them. And really it was more that concept of, okay, well, if there is sort of a community trail, if you do something a little bit more intentional and start to build some sort of network through the downtown, the area that I had highlighted is on that figure in red, but it's really mostly Shanda Park north, and then kind of wrapping around to Heron Point, you know, via Bryant Rock Bay Road,
Footbridge.
and the existing footbridge. So kind of just that pathing along the existing kind of core downtown riverfront. And then what I had sketched on in green is kind of more that idea of, you know, could you branch this out, you know, along your existing ways and make more intentional signage to, you know, bring it to the library, bring it to, you know, certain businesses, bring it to, you know, show people where the athletic fields are by the rec department. You know, all this stuff is within a pretty short walk. So I think there's some question about just what easements exist right now, how those languages spell out, you know. But this was really the idea, or what had been presented to Conservation Commission, again, mostly because Shanda and Heron Point are Conservation Commission properties, or properties administered, you know, by the Concom. So it seemed to have a good reception there, but I think, again, in that vision of when we get to the charrette, having like real ideas, like, I think the next step is what rights do the town actually have here, because it seems like there is right to them or something to them, but how concrete is that? Present maybe more of a fleshed out map, and then, you know, Betsy, I think you had the idea, but like logo, like an actual thing, you know, put something to it. So I ain't an art person, so that's somebody else, but I think that's kind of it. It's just as this continues to be more of a concrete idea. So I don't know.
So
if
have we investigated what any of the easements are?
No.
Has that been?
Well, unless you were really effective today.
No,
I sent it to her Friday night, so.
Okay.
I had already looked into some of the record information for McAllen Dam and the footbridge. So I had that on hand. And there are references in the deed for the bridge that the bridge itself was conveyed to the town the town owns that. And then it also notes in the deed, together with and subject to such rights and rights of ways, privileges and easements as may exist as to the use of the bridges and ways between and across North Main Street, Bay Road, and Lamprey River, and the Lamprey River, and rights and easements secured to New Hampshire Electric Company and references other deeds. And that's why it kind of ends up being a bit of a rabbit hole to research some of these things. But where I knew we owned the bridge and had a deed for the bridge, I wanted to at least start there. So there are references to other specific deeds for land transfers, and I found the Bryant Rock one, which was another item that came up with the Bay Road force main discussions and the bridge. So that one I had on hand as well, and that one has reference to public access easements and rights of ways from the bridge and including viewing areas. There's no recorded plan that has like meets and bounds to delineate where that access goes. That's somewhat ambiguous. And I think that's likely going to be true when we're talking about the properties on the west bank and coming south towards Shanda Park. I haven't looked into those yet, so I don't know what the deed language says on those. But knowing what was transferred through these deeds for the dam, the bridge, and Bryant Rock, I'm assuming it's going to be similar, and it's vague rights of public access and viewing.
Yep. Okay.
So actual definition of where that access is, I don't think we're going to have a lot of record information on that, and it may be up for discussion as to what that looks like going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's still fine, you know, maybe table it to January, see if, find anything more, know what we're getting into, but, yeah. It may not be a lot, but, you know, maybe there isn't anything needed, but.
No, and I mean, if the language is in there that there's public right of access,
Yeah.
then kind of, it may just be a matter of working with the various property owners on what that looks like and coming
Yeah.
to agreement on how that goes forward.
Yeah. Yeah, where would you like this to be? There is a right for its existence. You know, can we
Right.
work collaboratively to figure out how that looks?
Well, having looked at it again, at least might be handy. Again, I think a lot of our focus as we move forward from here will be to how to package what we know and what we've established so far,
Yeah.
so that we have something to present at the charrette. Here is what we know, and we've done some effort to know it. And you know, all of this would represent improving any part of these waterfront trails, et cetera, would involve a significant effort in terms of meeting with stakeholders and figuring out. So it's good to get, the fact that we're talking about it with the public doesn't necessarily mean all of this can happen. It just means that, is it worth our efforts?
Yeah.
You know, where should we go first? How should we approach that? Maybe get that kind of feedback.
I think that's the right way of putting it. Is it worth the town investing resources in this or not?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have anything more on that. I think we're good. I think the last comment was just to wrap up the master plan committee concept. So it looks like they're trying to meet every other, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. Second Wednesday of every month looks like the meeting interval for the master plan committee. By that interval, that puts, I think, the next meeting Wednesday night. Daylight said I actually can go this Wednesday, so I figured I'd go check it out. I know you'll be there, Bart's there, all that. But that is the interval. It looks like once a month, second Wednesday is the interval, which would make the next one January 10th. So I'll see what it's all about Wednesday and see if.
I chatted with Bart a little bit, and I
Okay.
said, I consider myself your alternate.
Yeah, I think that's probably it. I'd like to delegate it. I'm sure my wife would be pleased with that decision as well. But I'll go this week. We'll see what's even being discussed. See if they even want us around every time or not. You know.
Yeah.
I can go from there.
Oh, I should mention, because I'll just touch on it again. Part of what I was talking with Bart is that relates somewhat to the riverfront is the conversations I've been involved in terms of making sure that the town is working with the Port Authority to have the best markings we can in the river, and also maybe to provide some education to people about what to expect when they're navigating the lamprey, and, you know, signage around the park and stuff like that. And I think Bart was definitely interested in trying to capture some of what's been going on in terms of just building awareness at the time of the charrette. For, you know, a lot of people navigate the river. There's a lot of usage of the river, and I've been meeting with some of the people that are, you know, all of us were kind of talking among ourselves in different parts of the river, but I've been trying to encompass the river more and and we've, you know, been working with the Port Authority now for 3 years or so. We've come a long ways, and I think it's best to kind of make it, you know, maybe map out some of the buoy locations and some of those things. So that's what I'm starting to talk to Bart about a little bit there, and see what we can do.
Sounds great. Sounds really useful for people using the river to know what to expect and how to read the signs.
Well, just one example, there's a fellow I've met who's up, you know, in the downtown area using it, and he points out that, you know, as you come off from Heron Point, there is an arrow where there's lots of rocks, and there is not there's so many rocks around, it's hard to mark them, but at the same time, it's a place where people that are backing out or coming out of the landing at mid-tide, there's nothing marking the fact that there's just rocks all over the place over there. And so, and that's something beyond what the Port Authority wants to get into, at least from my limited conversation with them about it. But people in the downtown are saying, well, there ought to be something, so that people who have never put in the water there understand that this is,
Know what they're doing.
yeah. So I think we're better if we sort of band together and represent the interests of the town from the people that, you know, use the river, so.
I would agree with that. So I think that's all I had. I do think that the town's link to the master plan open space survey is live and active. So if people can find that, encourage you to fill it out. Surveys are only good if people respond, so fill it out, tell your friends to fill it out. But that's all I had. If not, I'm happy to adjourn. And so the next meeting would be, second Monday is actually the 8th, since the 1st is a Monday, which I think we should keep because the following week would then be Martin Luther King Day.
Sounds good.
So, all right, next meeting, January 8th.
So that's just the one that's automatically
Yep,
on the calendar.
it'll be automatic. And
Automatic is good.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Pass this back so it doesn't get lost. Yeah, you go, Sam.